Hello and welcome to another episode of FinTech Focus TV with me, Toby Babb. And today I'm absolutely thrilled to have into the studio Georgie Dickins, the author of Stratospheric CEOs. Must get a copy. I've been reading this and I reached out to Georgie because I thought it was absolutely fantastic. Saw it on LinkedIn, saw some of the great commentary, some of the great people who have been talking about. I thought this is up my street, bought it. And I couldn't ask for a better book. I've recommended it, bought it for people, etc., etc. And I'm thrilled to have you in here today. So, Georgie, thanks so much for coming into the studio.
What a wonderful introduction. Thank you.
So, how are you? Well?
Very well. I'm on the flight path into Christmas. So
you've been on the flight path everywhere by the sounds of it recently, haven't you? You're well travelled.
It has been a busy year, but a very rewarding one, a very exciting one. So I'm looking forward to some family time.
Superb, superb. Well, it is the time. We're filming this just the week before Christmas. So. I'm pleased that you're going to have a bit of downtime because it seems like it's been frantic and very good fun at the same sort of stage. So, look, I'm loving the book. We're going to get into the details about this in a second. But before we do that, give everyone a little bit of an introduction to yourself and and what you've been up to.
So I had 20 years in financial services on the electronic trading side for interest rate swaps. I left around 7 years ago to set up a business called Cajetan, which is a boutique business in leadership development, executive coaching. Mm-hmm. And as part of that, I have the great privilege of working with some extraordinary C-suite leaders, visionaries, entrepreneurs. And I love my time in the industry, and I was always really inspired by change makers, those shapeshifters, those people who are the disruptors, challenging the status quo. And I was also really inspired by those that lead with excellence. And so I left the industry to set up a business, and I get to do what I love every day. And
that sort of spun into writing books, speaking globally, all of this sort of stuff as well. Tell us a little bit about that side of it all.
Yes, there's 3 tracks. One track is that coaching, advisory. The second piece is I founded a network called Women in Leadership Global. I was very aware when I was in the industry, when you kind of get to that apex, there are fewer women. So for me, it was how can I help advance the face of leadership and really drive that systemic transformation.
And you mentioned that in the book actually as well, because it's focused on, was it 6 or 7 male leaders, and you sort of mention that in your foreword as well, don't you?
With the book, I was very specific in terms of the niche, which is founder CEOs in FinTech that have created multi-billion-dollar businesses.
Yeah.
I wanted to have a woman in the book, but there wasn't a woman who had, it kind of fitted that niche, which is another reason why I wanted to form Women in Leadership Global, to really equip women with the skills, the behaviours, the mindsets to unlock every part of them to achieve that level of success. And I think when I look at the founder CEOs in the book, many of them are, have been in the industry for like 4, 5 decades. Yeah. And if we look back on Wall Street then, it was a very, very male-dominated environment. So for me, the next frontier will be another book, and it will be a much more equal split male-female.
It's actually a very interesting point, that, isn't it? Because you talk about the environment back then and how it sort of changes through. You fast forward another 10, 15 years, and it's almost inevitable that's the route we're going in as well, isn't it? Which will be a much more blended sort of focus, I think, and makes a easier book to write.
And I said, with Women in Leadership Global, we see women who, and I think you look around the industry now, and there's so many role models, whether it's a Jane Fraser from Citi, and Adina Friedman, and Lynn Martin at the New York Stock Exchange. There are a lot more, and I think you can't become it if you can't see it. So there's a lot more role models who have really, trailblazers in the industry have paved the way to success that others can look up to.
I think that's so important, isn't it? If you can't believe it until you see it, and that sort of place now coming through. I think it's a really encouraging sort of time, actually. I talk a lot about that in the office, about how things are evolving and developing at such a pace. And as a business, we do a lot of work to try and improve visibility of that sort of area. And I think it's exciting about where it goes. So you've got you're talking about the 3. And so I jumped in there and through, of course, the 3 strands of the business.
Yeah. So there's the C-suite coaching, Women in Leadership Global, and then writing and speaking. Yeah. I never would have said I was a writer, and yet what really strikes me is because I get to work with some for me, stratospheric leaders, really some people who have just created such extraordinary success. And for me, when you go behind the curtain, you get to see how they do it. So for the books are all there. It's to democratize the wisdom, lessons, learnings, and insights that I'm hearing and make them available to a much wider audience. And yes, it's for emerging leaders, but equally for seasoned leaders as well, because sometimes we need those constant reminders.
Yeah.
So the books were really, it is that democratization that's been really kind of a driving force. And everything, we do across the organisation, across the businesses I run, it's all driven by impact, transformation. And you said a minute ago about things changing. The world is moving faster than ever before. And the blueprint we had from last week, last month, last year, you're having to continually evolve, to adapt and iterate. And sometimes some of those best lessons come from the past, because history has patterns. So, so how can we draw upon those lessons to inform how we show up powerfully and can drive the influence and the outcomes that we're looking for today?
I think that whilst we talk about the sort of world moving at pace and all this sort of thing, I think if you actually boil this down and look at the lessons that come out of that, they're wonderfully human, aren't they? There's nothing there which you think, right, this is a completely, in the nicest possible way, there's nothing revolutionary about what you're saying, which is the best part of it. There's not some sort of secret. And you mentioned there, stratospheric or in fact, give us a breakdown of how you would describe a stratospheric CEO. Yeah,
and it's really interesting because when I coined the term, this stratospheric leader, and I'm not sure that they would identify themselves as stratospheric. They would, I think, feel in a way that maybe they're being pedestalized, but I have pedestalized them. I think it's that rarefied atmosphere, because it's that founder CEO. It's one thing to have an idea, but then to take it through to implementation, execution, and 3-4 decades later still be the CEO in the seat. To me, that's extraordinary, and it's having that stamina and sustainability to continue to thrive, adapt, iterate, and evolve. And therefore, stratospheric, it underpinned, it's a very rare place that people get to.
Yeah.
And that, for me, it really, it's like the what and how they, that was the behind the book. It's like, so what do you need to do to get there? And you said about the human piece. Again, my filter as well was people who I'd want to have a conversation with, because they're very people focused. Like people they've assembled extraordinary teams around themselves, and there is a human side to them. And I really wanted in the book to share, who are they when they're not in the seat that they sit in, because I think you can look at the people at the top of an organisation and they can seem sometimes like avatars. And actually, there are days where, they move mountains, days where they wobble, they may have aging parents, children who are struggling. They're human beings. And I think leaders, we sometimes forget they're human. And therefore, I wanted to really pull out the fact they are human.
We see that in this very much so, don't you? There's talk about them, their families, how they go away, what they go off and do, etc., etc. I think that's a really important aspect of it. The other part of it is what they've gone through. There's various different phases where, be it, I speak to founders all the time, like every single day on this show in our day job, and there's the pressure of a funding round, the pressure of runways disappearing, the pressures that we've seen. When I first started doing this show, and we were talking loads to people during COVID. Those were pieces where it was something completely different. Loads of people started their job as CEO of a business just at the stage where the world shut down, and they navigated through all of that, so that sort of thing. It's a fascinating sort of humanised piece where you're looking at the nature of a CEO, because LinkedIn always shows rocket ship emojis and all this sort of thing around it, and that's where I think people start to think about this overnight success of it all.
Yeah, that's a myth, and it's the iceberg metaphor comes up for me, because people see the visible, like the 1/7 that's visible. They see the successes, the accomplishments, the awards, the accolades. No one sees the below the surface line unless you've got that close proximity to them. The setbacks, the failures, the speed bumps, the sleepless nights, the anxiety, the sacrifices, and there are many. And I think one of the things listening to you there was about failure, because people don't see failure, but failure is a function of success. It's a feature, not a bug. And I think it's in those moments, and when you speak to them, they've had many moments where things nearly haven't worked out. And it takes a certain mindset, a resilience, an attitude that really, and a belief. I think that is the one thing that really strikes me with these leaders. They've had the ability to see an unmet future. They've got the ability to solve things that others aren't yet solving for. And people would call them crazy. People would look at them and be like, well, that's just not possible. But if you look at Steve Jobs, if you look at Elon Musk, there's this fine line between brilliance and craziness. And that for me is, I think, why there was such a magnetism to them. And equally, I think people, their organizations, people want to be part of that team because it's a winning team.
Yeah.
And they have this unwavering belief that they're going to figure it out.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key thing. And I think the second piece is, when you chart a path, you can't possibly know what every step is, but that adaptability, not being afraid to course correct, bouncing back from the failures, that piece is so important. And I think there's many people that, you hit against failure and get defeatist, or you try and avoid it.
Yeah.
And actually you can't avoid it. It's part of it. It's then what you do with those data points, because when you know better, you can do better.
The embracing of it seems to me to be the thing. It's that there's resilience is a overused word, I think, in business at various different stages. And but the thing for me is that these people have been through various different phases. And you say, look, whilst they've seen various bits and pieces, and there's certain things that could be argued as completely revolutionary in the space in which they've been, they've actually just done things that other people are doing and just doubled down on it and moved into really interesting areas and created new marketplaces and we've both had the privilege of speaking to a number of different people in these times who've had success in their businesses, and I find it fascinating. This is why I love doing this show, because you're always talking to people there and you just see the energy. We were speaking about Brad, who comes up from Symphony, who comes up in this book at various stages, the energy, the enthusiasm, the sort of...
It's infectious.
And that comes up a lot in this, like infectious energy, infectious enthusiasm, passion, all of those sort of things. They can't be faked at various different times, can they? And it seems to be a real feature of...
It's emotions are contagious. There's something called emotional contagion, and I think your energy speaks for you before you even walk in the room. And they just have such a magnetising and energy.
Yeah.
And I think when you bring that optimism, that excitement, that people, it drives people, it motivates people, it inspires people, and there's substance behind it.
Yeah.
And the other piece that is listening to you there is about focus. I think there's such focused individuals.
Yeah.
Because it's very easy to get distracted by the shiny objects. It's very easy, especially today, because information is coming as thick and fast. It's very easy to give your management team a lot to do, but there's something where they are very, very focused. Lance, in the book, he talks about, he measures, when I say everything, but he measures so much. Your execution is really important. The execution plan and measuring yourself against that execution, not having vanity metrics, having real metrics. Even at his level, you think, and a lot of it is delegated, but still there is so much that he is looking at, because data gives you insight information. It gives you a level of understanding in terms of, okay, what do we need to change? What do we need to double down on?
I want to touch on Lance, because to me he's been a bit of a hero for a long time. I've not actually had the pleasure of meeting him or speaking to him, but I've spoken to loads of people who have. I think we were talking when we first started chatting about this, that there are so many companies that have been formed, so many founders that have come from his factory, effectively, from the famous barn, etc., and all this sort of stuff, to having this production line of hundreds now, or well over 100 companies, and who are founded by people who've been part of his story over the years as well. And that comes through from creating an environment there where people want to have that entrepreneur, where they learn and develop that sort of stuff as well. So it's been someone who I've looked over the fence at for a long time. I've known lots of people who've worked for him, and again, you just have that same sort of. There's no one I've ever met who's had bad words to say about that. And for someone who's gone along that sort of journey, that's unusual at the same sort of stage with it as well. So, tell me about some of the sort of mythology that you see from there, and what it boils down to in his story.
I think there is something about his charisma, his charm, and look, I think you can be relentless and driven and drive people hard, but you can still be kind, a human-centered leader.
Yeah.
He's a very human-centered leader. He deeply cares about his people, and I think people. It's interesting. I asked him in an interview. I was doing a fireside with him a while ago, and I said, "Are you people-led, customer-led, or product-led?" And he said, it's been interesting because people would assume I'm product-led because it's very much about the product. But he said it's people-led because people are behind culture, people are behind execution, people are behind processes, people are behind innovation. And it really, you really get a sense of that when you speak to him. It is about the people. And then if it's about the people, then how do you get the best out of them? How do you motivate them? How do you inspire them? How do you make sure that they're bought in? And I think what's key with all these leaders in the book, yes, they're CEOs, but also they're CROs, they're the chief repetition officers of their vision, making sure that everyone in the organization can speak to what is the vision, what is our North Star, where are we heading? And it's about values, principles, what are we as an organization, what do we stand for? And these are not just words that are emblazoned in reception on the back of a wall, but these are values that people want to be, that they ascribe to, and they're values. They're not just words, but they're lived and breathed. And I think when you get the culture right, people want to be part of a winning team. So you get more of a winning team that drives stronger execution. So it becomes really self-fulfilling when there's such a heavy emphasis on people and that human-centered approach to leadership.
As you're talking about that, there's an anecdote that sort of pops into my mind. That I was out in our New York office a couple of months ago, and I met up with a friend of mine who worked for him not so long ago, and he was chatting around. He actually had a copy of the book, and he was talking about having read it, and he was fascinated, obviously, around the bits around Lance and all this sort of thing. And he told me a story where it was during COVID, and he'd text everyone and said, or sent a message out, and it was, I can't remember the exact detail, but it was something about a fitness challenge that they were doing, and anyone could sort of correspond with him. And you think about how many people it was at that sort of stage. It's a big business. And Gavin was there and texting him and having to and fro from him about that sort of thing. And I thought, at that sort of stage, that's a pretty special thing to be able to do at that sort of time, because it can become quite removed. But to me, it always felt to me like no matter how big the company got and how big it went through, it was still the accessibility of him in the barn at that sort of stage. And I think that's a very difficult and unusual sort of place to be at the same time as well.
I think the leaders in the book, they recognise the importance of that level of engagement with people. So it's how do you find those opportunities to connect? Because it has a ripple of impact. It's that ROI, it ripples out across the organisation. So, I mean, Lance has it, but they all have it, and they've got a different way of integrating that, but that is very much a key feature. And you talk about
the difference is another important part of this, right? Because there are certain people there whose charisma walks into the room before they do, as you talk about, in different ways, because there are introverts and extroverts that you're talking about, and in there you talk about introverted leaders and how they do, but that's, it's and you go back to Jim Collins and Good to Great, and he talks about level 5 leaders. Those level 5 leaders are very much not necessarily the Barnum and Bailey shows that come through from it as well, don't there? There's lots of different ways of achieving that, and I thought that was a very interesting blend in the people you were talking about. Was that deliberate, or was that just by chance? Or?
It was a bit of both, actually. And what's interesting is when you think about extroverted, introverted, there's something there, and I know this word is bandied around a lot about authentic, being an authentic leader, but there is something there about finding your own authenticity in terms of how do you need to show up, what's your uniqueness, and what's your way of connecting with people. There's one leader, in particular in the book, who really identifies as being an introvert, and yet he's recognised, he's a great storyteller. So he recognises that's how he can connect, whether it's town halls, whether it's off-sites, whether it's when he bumps into someone, in the lift. I think leadership today is about being authentic with more skill. You don't want to fundamentally change who you are. You wouldn't be in that leadership seat if you weren't great at what you do. But it's looking around the environment, the context in which we operate now, and it's what are the levers that I need to adjust slightly to reach my desired outcome. And it's you walk a really tightrope, as a leader, because the expectations on leaders are far greater than they've ever been before. It's stakeholders are available, want you to be available 24/7. Everything you do or say is evergreen. You can easily be mischaracterized, misrepresented. So there's tough, because people will be like, I want to see fully who you are. And yet, if we take COVID for an example, people are looking to you for confidence, for certainty, for clarity, for direction. You can't be demonstrating too much that you're wobbling, because people are looking for you for strength and guidance in that situation. And therefore, I think there's this continual calibration of what is the context? What's the environment? What's my desired outcome? And what do I need to, like, how do I need to adjust things to make sure I'm connecting? But it's a fine balancing act.
And there's so many different ways that people can get to it as well. Another common theme that you were talking about was this concept, which I love, and I'm already weaving into 2025 as vernacular across the office, which is the whole concept of raising the bar.
Yeah.
So I love the whole thing about raising the bar. We put it into a recruitment strategy, which we had in our business, where we wanted people there who could make it more, raise the bar every single time they came in. So if we were going to make a hire, were people going to look left and right and think that's another person who's raised the bar and raised the bar? And I think if you look at these companies who you're highlighting in there, there's a lot of that within it, but it's also deliberate. And they can raise the bar in standards, they can raise the bar in expectations, they can raise the bar in people, they can raise the bar in a product. It's it's a relentlessness around that sort of stuff, isn't it, there as well? What does raising the bar mean to you when you were putting the book together?
Yeah, continuous improvement. So I think it's, however great an accomplishment, you can always look forward and be like, right, how can I improve? And one of the leaders, he speaks about being an incrementalist. And sometimes growth isn't the big swings, it's those small things that compound that really make a difference.
Iterative by nature, like the industries which they're working in, right?
It is. So that raising the bar, and it's interesting, Lance in the book, he talks about raising the bar, and then when it got to a certain level, it's like, right, now we're widening the gap, because we've got to a great level. But these things don't happen by chance. No one gives you a fortune cookie to be like, right, we are suddenly, we're growing and we're evolving. It's about that attention on it. And what does that look like? Because sometimes we can say, yeah, let's raise the bar. That's a headline. What does that actually mean? What are we? And it's making sure leaders are, what are we measuring? Yeah. Because I think I said earlier, what gets measured improves. So really being thoughtful around what does that look like? But standards, how you connect with people. It's not just about results. Bottom line, if you get the other piece right around people, that ultimately feeds the bottom line.
And you mentioned other areas there that were particularly stood out in the book. Execution's another one of those big words that gets put around a lot, but it's a big part of the feature of what the and it's a fascinating chapter on it within the book as well. Execution is there's a lot of visionaries in this space. Yeah. There's a lot of people who've got the next big thing that's set to change the industry, but it never quite takes off. Yeah. And it usually doesn't take off because, you mentioned a word before that I think is incredibly important and incredibly difficult, which is focus. Yeah. So when you see high performers, I think in any industry, focus is one of those, and clarity, two words that coexist, are super important within it. That then drives the execution of saying, right, what are we actually going to do and what's the pathway to get there? It's a really important part of what you've seen from these people as well. Right?
It is, because you could have the best strategy, but there are words on a piece of paper, and all of the leaders, I had so many wonderful quotes that came out about how they think about execution. I love that quote bit at the back as well. You must have loved writing that bit. It was because they came out with such incredible sound bites, and it's often people have these great ideas, but you could get a great idea from a think tank. So this idea, how does it look? How moving it into execution from concept to implementation, that's the tough part. And I talked about people a lot. This is about hiring people who'll get the job done. And so you really need your execution jockeys around you. And
I love that phrase as well, execution jockeys.
And they're very intentional around when they're hiring, looking for that individuals who have demonstrated that execution in the past, because ultimately that's you're looking at people, I said, who can move the business forward.
Let's focus on that, because you talked about bringing people in around you and all that sort of thing. You mentioned earlier on about it becomes an environment there that people want to join by its nature of, and the power of the movement, I guess, that goes along with the company. Recruitment isn't an easy job in financial services, full stop. There's a lot of people in there who are, particularly in the technology side, I think there's a lot of innovation within the space, and it doesn't necessarily catch up with the level of talent that's out there. So quite often you're in what's been characterised at various different stages as a war for talent. Yeah. And there are various different phases, candidate-led and client-led marketplaces, but invariably within financial technology, in the 25 years I've been working within it, there is always a battle for the very best talent. So if I see anyone at a high-end level in this industry, they will usually, and they're on the marketplace, they will usually have 3 or 4 different options to deal with. And the company that wins is the one that's able to articulate the vision and tighten it to what they want to do. So to get the very best people in your business isn't an easy task. Yet these people have almost created this cheat code, so to speak, where the best people want to join their businesses. So if you look at the recruitment secrets to glamorise it a little bit, what would you think that these people are doing that allows them to attract those execution jockeys, that allows them to get the very best talent, the best people coming to their business, wanting to flock to their business to be part of this story?
I think it's understanding people's motivations and drivers. What do they ultimately care about? And when you look at these CEOs and the companies that they've built, they're disruptors, they're creators, they're visionaries, they're shapeshifters, and I think it then attracts those people who want to take on risk. I think back certainly in the early days of some of these organisations, people left jobs in banking where you've got reputational capital, you've got job security, and you're moving to a place where you don't, there hasn't been decades of a track record what you can, but there's a belief in the vision. So I think it kind of becomes self-fulfilling. People gravitate to that energy and that, and I think they attract people who are innovators themselves. So you've got these entrepreneurs in residence in other organisations that want to be part of these fintech organisations, and I think it then becomes self-fulfilling because there's that advocate marketing. People who are in the organisation are talking to their friends and their network, and so I don't know this for sure, but I imagine many people are coming to them being like, right, how do hire me? It's kind of going in the opposite direction. Yeah.
It's definitely the case, isn't it? And there's certain companies which you just know, as soon as their name's mentioned, people recognise it. They know that there's great people working there. They want to be part of that whole thing, and it's not easy to create. And you have to sort of create that sort of mythology or mystique around the business to be able to do that. But the more you can have those people in the tribe, the more it sort of becomes second nature to them.
And I do think culture, we discussed that earlier, is such a critical piece.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's such an important, and there's such a maniacal focus on culture and values that I think then people self-select in or out in terms of, is it a culture that I will thrive in?
Yeah.
Because it is one that drives people hard. It's intense. It's high pressure. And ultimately, that high risk, you can get the rewards. You can really learn, grow, and elevate yourself.
I think that's a really important part, actually. And I was thinking about it as you were saying it, is that culture is such a critical part of most great organisations, sport, military, business, whichever way you want to look at it. People talk about culture, and I think when you talk about the companies who you mentioned in this thing, there is a huge amount of focus on hours, time. It's not easy. None of those are easy rides in the companies you've spoken about. And I've worked with a lot of them. I put people into a lot of them. There's some great success within it, but it's not for the faint-hearted to go into those companies at any sort of stage. And I think sometimes people mistake culture when they hear it. It's sometimes quite a woolly word, and you think culture is done by a breakfast bar, or culture's done by a beanbag, as people, back in we go to the table tennis tables and all that sort of stuff. But culture is about high performance culture where it's at its best, I think. And that's about being able to look around and know you've got the facilities, the brand, the people, the leadership, all of those different bits and pieces to come together where people are saying, we're doing something different, we're doing something that other people aren't, and we want to invest that discretionary effort into making it through there. And that's a very significant gift that these people have got, to be able to create that sort of stuff that allows that to happen, isn't it?
It is, and I think, but there's an intentionality to it.
Yeah.
It hasn't happened by chance.
Yeah.
Like it's been we use the word focus. It's been such a focus because it's that flywheel out. Once when you have that focus, what is possible when you attract great people. Yeah,
and you give them that. The other side of it is, and you talk about this a lot. And it's something actually which I don't see an awful lot written about in books similar to this, which is the genuine human element of it all. And I think actually when you look at some of the people there and you think of the reputations and the companies they're in, what I think you do a great job in this book is actually humanising it and saying that they do actually care, and I think sometimes in the businesses or the sector that we work in, sometimes you think it's very much pounds and pence led. And actually the investment in the human stories behind that, and the looking after the families, and again going back to the person I was talking about earlier on, he'll always talk about the support he got to go out and take his family out to do something, the support he had around letting his family settle in Boston and doing all those sort of things. It's a really fascinating part of the thing here, where it's not just for a better expression, bums on seats. It's investing in individuals and giving them the opportunity to be the best, best they can possibly be in their roles.
And I think that piece is really important. When I look at these leaders, that they, like one of them said, I hire the Avengers. I can be an inch of an expert on every aspect of the business, but I have these leaders in their seats because they're the best of the best. Yeah. And I think you have to be willing to let go, because a lot of leaders talk about, I delegate, I'm empowered. But then if you ask their people, they're still having a really tight grip.
It's incredibly difficult.
And it's really difficult. But those that really succeed, because you can't possibly, especially as you evolve and grow and scale, you can't possibly be involved in everything. So trust is a key word for me, that you have to trust you have the right people in the right seats, and then you have to let them run with it. And culture starts at the top. So once, it has to be modeled, the CEO, the leadership team level, and then that starts to permeate through the organization. Because if you as the leaders are not modeling the values, then how can you expect others to? So that sponsorship really, really starts at the very top.
Georgie, you do this wonderful job of just speaking to some of the most amazing people on the planet around leadership, which is one of the most amazing topics on the planet. And be it the people in this book, and this is a massive question, so I apologise in advance, and I haven't prepped you for it. But all the people in this book, the people who you're speaking to and coaching on a daily basis, the people you've met, you've spoken about the network. We've got a lot of people in common at various different phases who are absolutely phenomenal at what they're doing. If you're to characterise one or two of the main characteristics that they share, and I know there'll be things here in the book around it, but if you were to say, right, this is the things which you think they double down on, they work harder, they're better at than anyone else, that differentiates them from the good to the great. Yeah. Again, to lean into and steal that that phraseology, what would you say those characteristics would be?
God, that's a really good one. The words that are just coming up as you're saying that, I think one of the key things is that investment in people. I know we've spoken about that a lot already today, but you just can't underestimate when you get a winning formula, you get winning people, it attracts more winning people, and more winning people, it ripples out. So that for me, they're very, very people led, because you could have the best product, but if you don't have the right people out selling it, iterating and evolving it, well then it could be the best product, but it's not going to get the clients, the investors behind it. So I think that people piece is key. And what I've seen also when we talk about people, the CEOs in this book, they've got extraordinary boards, boards on the advisory side, because no one's an island. No one can navigate everything that's coming at these leaders thick and fast on their own. And so it's where you can dip into people who've been there, done things before. And so the board pieces, and when we talk about people, has been certainly something I observed. The expertise, the wisdom, the kind of the DNA that they've got is extraordinary. Execution is the second piece. Again, we've spoken about that at length today, but it really, really matters. When you see businesses not fulfilling or getting to the heights that they're destined to, often it's because they're trying to focus on too many things. They're not measuring themselves against the execution. They don't have the right people executing. So that execution piece, I think, is important. I think the third one is, yes, they all work incredibly hard, really long hours, and yet at the same time they really recognise what is their fuel for the bigger picture. That might be going for a run. I was just about to ask
you about this as well, yeah.
Yeah, some people have said it's going for a run, going for a walk, going to the gym, going on a holiday, but that's not time out, it's time invested. And one of the leaders in the book, when we did the launch in New York, I said, is it possible for leaders to have an off switch? And if it is, how do you hit it? And he said, I don't have an off switch. Anyone who's ever spoken to me will tell you I don't have an off switch, which is a really, again, an interesting to hear him share that. He said, I have on switches. And on switches to him, for one of his on switches is family. So he said, I make sure that I actively, hit that on switch, because no one's going to do it for me. The world, that we look at the world around us, the demands on leaders are far greater than they've ever been before. And if you want that stamina and sustainability in the seat, yes, you need that infrastructure around you, the right people, but you also need to be having these robust strategies that enable you to have that time to recharge, to rejuvenate, because that's when the ideation comes. That's when that creation comes as well, the creativity.
It's a really underestimated part of the whole thing, isn't it? And I'm pleased that that sort of became a part of the book, because it's not an easy thing to do, to build that time into it all. It's frantic. There's only so many hours in the day. There's a lot of responsibilities. These guys are dealing with it at huge stat levels, you know, in often all across the world at various time scales at different times. So it would be very easy just to be completely on all the time. But that ability to invest in themselves, I think, was a really important part of it. Yeah,
it's highly intentional.
Yeah.
I think if you try and wait to find time to do those things, you never find that time, because people steal time from you, and it's easy to squander time. Therefore, it's built in. And I said it's a non-negotiable, and it's prioritised. All good leadership starts with self-leadership, and self-leadership is making sure you're fit for purpose. And being fit for purpose, having that mental acuity, that ability to make decisions. It requires you to. You've got to. There's so many debits that are coming from your kind of energy bank account. You've got to be putting the credits in as well to offset those.
Definitely. And there's one last, because I knew this would fly. I mean, this is I could spend hours on this, and so to try and cram all of this into half an hour, I knew it was going to be gone. It feels like it's been chatting for 5 minutes. So I'm going to finish with one last piece on it, which is something I find fascinating, which is you talk about realistic optimism in the whole piece. Now, positivity for me is one of our core values as a business. So is execution, so is excellence, so is Free Decor and Kaizen. So all areas that sort of tie into actually some of the things that you're talking about here in the book. But I think, optimism is something there which sometimes gets a bit of a rough ride, and I think usually it's because it hasn't got that realistic piece behind it. So there's blind optimism, which can lead to pretty devastating downgrades in terms of forecast and all that sort of stuff, and there's realistic optimism alongside it. And getting that bit between caution and risk and all of those sort of things, I thought that was a really interesting piece that comes into it. So give us your sort of view of how people get the optimism piece right.
Yeah, it speaks as well to making sure you've got the people around you to bring that diversity of opinion, diversity of perspective. What are we not noticing? What corners have we not looked around? To really make sure then that your vision, your strategy is thoughtful, it's considered. So it's realistic. It's not like you've just come up with this an idea, and it's so you've had conversation around it to really give thought to, like, is this possible, and how realistic is it? What are the time frames? What do they look like? So you want to and energy optimism is infectious.
Yeah.
And you want to make sure you want to tap into that founder craziness, because it's exciting, and that's where the magic, the alchemy really happens. And also it's just having, I talk about leaders having their trusted tribe around them. It's having those people just to make sure that they're grounding you, that yes, you're in the stratosphere, but also you need to be tethered to the earth as well.
Yeah, I think that's so important, isn't it? That there's and it comes back to everything you're talking there about people having that right bunch of people around you to sort of move it in the right sort of way. I think when you're putting the passion behind a vision, and there's all that sort of thing about where it can go and how quickly you can get there and what it can happen behind it. It's tempering that sort of thing up, and I've been fascinated for years, and this is why I love the book so much. I love leadership, full stop. I love looking and studying the best leaders through military history, through sports history, through business history, all of these different areas, and seeing the traits of it. So it's allowed me to then follow it up by meeting lots of different people who've been massively successful in all different walks of life around where you go. And I think overwhelmingly when I see these sort of people, there is that infectious enthusiasm, that positivity that comes through from it. So I always think that sort of trait in an individual is something that I'd want to follow, and so something that I want to be, and something which you put into it. And I think the bit that grounded me in this was also having that bit there where it's got to be based on something that's otherwise it sort of drifts away, doesn't it? It becomes like a hot air balloon.
But the positivity, I think that it's so infectious.
Yeah.
And I think we can underestimate how we show up, how it matters, and how it informs. I talk with leaders. I say, when you go into meetings, like, what's the wake you're leaving behind you? Think like a boat. Yeah. When because I said earlier, emotions are infectious. When you bring that positivity, it's fuel. It feeds people. It inspires people, and And I think some people are naturally very positive. Others, it's a muscle you have to exercise. Yeah. But the more you exercise it, the more kind of you nurture it, and it's more omnipresent.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, I've loved this. I knew I would. Thanks so much for coming in today and sharing all the things. And for all you watching, Amazon, all good booksellers, go in and get a copy. It is a brilliant, brilliant read. For people who want to find out more, Georgie, about the book or about the speaking or about the networks and the coaching that you do, what's the best way for them to reach out and get in touch?
Either on LinkedIn, and it's Georgie Dickins with an I, not with an E, Charles Dickens with an E, so people normally think I'm an E, or georgiedickins.com.
Perfect. Listen, Georgie, thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you.
And thank you all for watching. We will see you soon on the next episode of FinTech Focus TV. Thanks a lot.